Hola, everybody. Good to be here on my roof. So I wanted to talk about microdosing tonight because I get a lot of questions in the my psychedelics group on Facebook, and also when I started to do research for this live stream, I wasn't surprised because I noticed this before, that most of the advice and information that is available out there online is not accurate. There's a lot of misrepresented research, and I think maybe people don't really understand what the placebo effect is, because when I've had a few conversations with people about this, and I say something to the effect that you know, the research has established that microdosing is entirely or mostly a matter of placebo effect. According to research, and people say, well, but I experienced an improved mood and enhanced learning capacity, and placebo effect usually, in like clinical studies, it's like up to 40% of people experience some measurable changes. So that doesn't mean anything. I'm sorry. Plus, you're not a person, a human, is not in controlled conditions. I've seen like these videos where people say, I saw an alien yesterday. I'm not surprised. Kind of off topic. Let's save that for the Q&A a little bit later. I don't know what's going on here though. My chat box is gone. But what I'm saying is that I'm not saying that microdosing doesn't have any benefits. What I am saying is that I see a lot of misrepresentation. I see a lot of bad information, and I saw, particularly with mescaline, which there has been zero research for decades, as far as I can find. There was some scary dosing recommendations for microdosing, and I actually have experimented with microdosing ayahuasca, vine only, ayahuasca with DMT, microdosing DMT, microdosing LSD, even ketamine, and so I felt unusually qualified, having access to all of these things for so long, to offer my perspective. Ecuador gringo. I'm not really sure what the hell that message is supposed to mean, but so let's try to stay on track here. As we all know, psychedelics are tremendously powerful compounds for affecting psychological, spiritual, emotional transformation. I don't think it's too strong of a word. Yeah, SSRIs are generally bad news, I think, but we'll get to that. So the fundamental thing about psychedelics and the resistance that we are encountering today, for example, when I was looking around in various groups, people looking for advice, particularly it seems like religious people will tell people, like it's really reckless to when am I going back to Europe? I'm not from Europe. Huasi Pungero. That sounds like Quechua. Yeah, I don't know what is that, like some Ecuadorian person telling me I should go home? Anyways, the neuroplasticity and the neurogenesis that are either enhanced or catalyzed by these substances is the main reason that that these substances are capable of producing the kind of dramatic changes that that they do. And I think that the incredulousness that we encounter from people is largely due to ignorance of the neuropharmacology that is responsible, or neurobiology that's responsible for the efficacy of the administration of these compounds. One researcher, I don't know if I wrote his name down, Ross, I know Dr. Ross, his last name, at Johns Hopkins, a psychiatrist, said that it is simply unprecedented in the history of medicine that a single dose of, it is unprecedented in the history of psychiatry that a single dose of a medicine could produce such lasting, such dramatic and enduring effects. And so it really is almost too much for a lot of the researchers to even believe when they see the effects of these compounds on for the different applications. For example, addiction, the cessation rate of smokers is 65% higher than any other method with psilocybin and LSD. The efficacy for treating depression as well is, as that researcher said, unprecedented. So let's start out with talking about psilocybin, because that's the one that people are generally the most interested in. And this is also one that I have probably the most experience, with microdosing in particular. Psilocybin is not actually the active constituent, it's psilocin. It's strange to me that even in clinical clinical research settings, no one talks about researching psilocin. It's only psilocybin, which actually no one has ever gotten any effect from, because the body metabolizes it into psilocin. And so, as with all of these compounds, by the way, they have a couple of things in common, overlapping effects. And that is increased brain-derived neurotropic factor, and that contributes to the enhanced neuroplasticity and increased neurogenesis. The probably most remarkable observation that's been made in research in regards to psilocybin is that damaged brain cells have actually been observed to regenerate with the administration of psilocybin. And this is a phenomenon that was considered impossible prior to the discovery that psilocybin could actually regenerate damaged or withered brain cells. If a person suffers from depression for long enough, alcoholism does this as well, the brain cells sort of shrivel and become inactive. And psilocybin actually causes them to regenerate. And this is nothing short of a miracle. Psilocybin is so efficacious at this that they are actually, I think it's Johns Hopkins that is trying to revive brain dead patients using psilocybin, people that have been in comas for a year or longer. And I wouldn't be one bit surprised if they actually had some success with this. And so to get back to microdosing specifically, my experience with psilocybin microdosing, and also this is consistent with the research that's been done, is that it does not work. Microdosing, meaning that you are mushroom zombies, yeah. You're taking such a low dosage of the psilocybin that there's no discernible effect. There's no intoxication, there's no body buzz, nothing at all. There is no measurable difference between a placebo control group and people that are using microdoses of psilocybin. And in my own experience, when you know what the potential for the catalyzing change and catalyzing consciousness, increasing intelligence, curing depression of these compounds is, and then contrast that with, at least for me, what I experienced with just microdosing mushrooms. There really is nothing dramatic. And I don't really, I understand that people have to work, and that psychedelic experiences aren't necessarily always convenient for people, but in my experience, low doses of mushrooms on a regular basis, where you do have a noticeable effect, but not like a full-blown psychedelic experience, can dramatically alter your state in terms of depressive qualities, enhance your creativity, and measurably improve memory, and concentration is enhanced. Also a feeling of connectedness to what I call the universal mind, intuition, even precognition, which, if you follow my channel, you know that I don't really attribute that to woo. I think that the enhanced communication between different regions of the brain can explain even precognition to a certain extent. Let me glance at my notes here and see. Okay, so that's my experience and my opinion, is that if you are depressed, and this, I guarantee you, it will help you, like 100%, absolutely. I'm not selling anything. There are no microdosing supplements for sale in the description of this video, but you will find links to join our Patreon to access premium content, secret streams, and you can make a one-time contribution because we are demonetized and totally self-supporting. We will get to microdosing LSD, psilocybin. Where were we at with that before I got distracted by my little pitch? Okay, diet. A diet in association with using microdoses or low doses. And what I'm advising, just to be clear, I guess, is that I have found, at least for myself, that the most efficacious approach is to take a dose of psilocybin mushrooms that is barely perceptible, and or maybe moderately perceptible, and then tolerance builds pretty rapidly with these things. So if you repeat this every 3 to 4 days, you will be more comfortable with the sensations that occur with any one of these psychedelics. I think that even at low doses, there can be some tension in the body, maybe mild nausea, generally not at lower doses, but I know that some people are very sensitive. And there are ways that you can mitigate the nausea, and we'll get to that. But for me, every 3 days, barely perceptible doses had a dramatic and lasting impact. I suffered from, I think, some depression. My mother committed suicide a few years ago under some pretty regrettable circumstances. Our last interaction was not good, and I think that weighed very heavily on me. And also, I have struggled with autoimmune disorders for most of my life, and I combated those the symptoms of those immune disorders with pharmaceutical painkillers, which led to addiction and ultimately to liver damage, mostly from the fillers that were in the painkillers. Sorry, I just heard a voice downstairs that shouldn't be here, like the gate's locked. So, man, that was really really strange that this person basically telling me to go back to Europe. Anyways, and so I actually did incur quite a bit of damage to my organs and also to my brain. And the brain damage was actually, I think, mostly the result of the drug that was given to me to take care of withdrawal, Suboxone, and to in order to stop taking the painkillers that I'd become physically dependent upon. And so regenerating these neural pathways has been of critical importance to me. It was so bad after the Suboxone treatment that I'm a musician and I could not remember music anymore. I couldn't remember like a couple of measures of music, and so the stuff that I'm sharing with you in regards to the psychedelics not only lifted me out of severely depressive states, but it's also regenerated my brain to the point where I don't know that I'm back to where I was before I did all of this damage, but I can definitely memorize a song again. Hey there, Frowlin. And so what I'm getting at here, though, is that there is more to this than just taking psilocybin. Your diet, inflammation of any kind is the enemy. Down here in South America, I have had the honor and privilege to work a little bit with some indigenous people with the plant medicines. And by plant medicines, I don't mean entheogens. I just mean like ancestral medicines for treating illness. And one of the things that I've noticed is that every single one of these plants has anti-inflammatory effects. And I have also noticed, by the way, that the addition of a small quantity of ayahuasca to any one of these plants triples the efficacy of them at least. And there's a number of reasons for that. But I think that one of those reasons is that ayahuasca is probably the most efficacious at treating inflammation and also neuroinflammation. So what I'm suggesting is that if you are trying to improve your mind or heal your body, you have to address your diet, because these, especially if you're only microdosing with psychedelics, these are very subtle effects, especially at very low doses. So you have to make sure that your tissues are permeable and that inflammation is minimized. Also, so sugar, excessive caffeine, anything that can cause a lot of wheat, I think, can cause inflammation in a lot of people. So some attention to the diet is an extremely significant prerequisite. And I also think that brain foods, the brain needs its fuel and its building materials in order to use these accelerants. So what you eat is what you are, right? So the Stamets stack, I'm sure some of you guys have heard of that. Absolutely brilliant. Niacin may even have some, I can't remember the term, it's something like neuropruning, basically. We were talking earlier about how depression and basically any kind of toxic mental state results in these shriveled brain cells, and niacin stimulates and maybe even prunes those shriveled the tips, which is where the neurogenesis is that's where it happens. So Stamets has devised a product. I don't have a link to sell it, and it may not be legal in whatever country. Hello, Morocco. Like in the United States, for example. And by the way, he did try to use an analog, a psilocybin analog that was legal, and he said it actually didn't work very well. So that's not an option really to get around it, finding psilocybin analogs that are legal. Apparently it needs to be, it needs to actually be psilocybin. And then so, you don't need to buy this product, by the way. I'm going to tell you how to make it, basically. A niacin capsule with your, whatever your dosage of psilocybin is going to be. I hesitate to even give any dosing recommendations for psilocybin mushrooms because they are extremely variable especially if they're wild. Wild collections can range by tenfold from one mushroom to the next. So titrating doses with wild mushrooms is completely ridiculous. What you can do, however, is make some blue honey. And this is a very effective way to even out your material in terms of potency. And so all that requires is that you take cracker dry mushrooms and put them in a coffee grinder or blend them up, however, and put them in honey. And you'll see various recommendations in terms of like how much honey to use per ounce of mushrooms or whatever. But in my experience, it's best to just make it as strong as possible. Completely just cover the mushrooms with the honey and let it sit for, I would say, probably 6 weeks. And then you can strain out the material, and it the psilocybin will be evenly distributed in the honey. And then you can start with like a tablespoon. I think is for me, and again, everyone's going to be different depending on your how sensitive you are to these compounds and your body weight. But for me, being about a 190-pound person, a tablespoon was in that range of not being like a full-blown psychedelic experience, but also enough effect that I felt like it was actually efficacious for affecting depression and enhancing cognition and all of the things that we're looking for from psilocybin. And so what I was saying also is that from strain to strain, there's a tremendous amount of variation from golden teachers versus penis envy, which I've noticed are extremely popular. I would say that if, let's assume psilocybe cubensis, 3/4 of a gram every 3 days, I think would be a good place to start. And if it's a little too much, you can back it up a little bit. And I would say to increase the dose. If you don't notice at least something in the venue of like a caffeine type effect, you're probably not taking enough. So let's see, is there anything else to say about psilocybin? Oh, yes. And this does not just apply to psilocybin. Anyone that's taking entheogens for any reason, any type of entheogen, you are going to benefit significantly from taking lion's mane mushroom, particularly the mycelium. I can't remember the name of the compounds off the top of my head, but there are alkaloids in the mushroom that are so efficacious at reversing or rebuilding neuropathways that they are being used to treat dementia. So you are going to get a lot more out of your psychedelic investitures if you take basically the Stamets stack, which is lion mane's mushroom with psilocybin. You just have to find the dosage that actually works for you. I don't think there's really good recommendations. If you take a gram of decent cubensis, you're probably going to have that's going to be more than a therapeutic dose. So between a half a gram and 3/4 of a gram is much higher than most people would advise for microdosing. But as I said earlier, the research suggests that really truly microdosing isn't going to help much, and my experience corroborates that. In combination with a diet that is not going to cause inflammation, try to get rid of at least white sugar. Also, as a facilitator, one of the things that I've noticed is that people that have a diet high in processed foods, oftentimes psychedelics have no effect on them. So my suspicion is that some of the aluminum-based food additives probably get into our receptors and jam them up, or some kind of phenomena to that effect. Because, for example, I had a couple in an ayahuasca ceremony a little while back, and it was kind of a spur-of-the-moment thing. they didn't take anything that I was going to harm them. So even though they hadn't observed much of a dieta, we continued with the ceremony, but it was actually practically impossible to get any effect. It took quite a bit of work. I think that eating as much local, organic, DHEA, avocados, anything that a lot of fish, feed your brain, basically, is what I'm saying. Okay, so let's throw a curveball in there and surprise some of you hippies, because a lot of people seem to have a prejudice about LSD and ketamine and MDMA. And the truth is that not everything man creates is fundamentally bad. And I think that LSD is actually a really beautiful example of man collaborating with nature and producing something amazing, doing something right for once, you know. I think intent has a lot to do with it. But LSD actually, in terms of clinical research, is the most potent catalyst for neurogenesis and enhances neuroplasticity the most out of all of the entheogenic compounds, including DMT and ayahuasca, which actually surprised me. I would have thought that DMT, being the heavy hitter, the strongest and the most inexplicably, insanely bizarre. I just would have thought that the trophy would have gone to DMT or ayahuasca, but apparently LSD is the winner, just in terms of measurable changes in neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. This is another study that I've seen misrepresented really badly online. People saying, you know, like, I think part of the problem is that people don't know how to read technical papers, and because what I've seen, it's not people that are selling a product like lying about it. It's not people. A lot of these people are not they're not selling anything, but their information is not, you know, and they'll even include the link to the study, and then you click on it and it says the opposite of what they're. So I don't know if they're just trying to make like reality conform to their prejudices, or what is going on with that exactly. But I see that over and over and over again. Maybe their cognitive capacity is not, you know, they're not able to quite process the information, and they actually just come away with the wrong idea. But LSD, the study, you know, so like this research shows that LSD causes this increase in brain-derived nootropic factor, and I had read that there was no difference with the placebo control group, and so I was like, that's interesting, and I clicked on it and read it, and it said basically that there was no discernible difference, except for once you got up to the 20 microgram level. Now, for most people, 20 micrograms is going to be a little bit more than a microdose. It's not going to really have an intoxicating effect. You're not going to have a full-blown trip. But to call that a microdose for most folks, it's not really accurate. So, but as far as like a dosage recommendation, and that's another place that LSD, out of all these plant medicines, since it's not a plant medicine, it's a little bit easier to titrate a dose. And so it's looking like 20 micrograms of LSD is enough to pretty dramatically spike the brain-derived BDNF, which is the compound that is suspected to be responsible for the enhanced neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, which is our fundamental objective, at least physically, in terms of physical changes in the brain. So yeah, that's the surprise with LSD, is that it is actually the most efficacious, and I guess it's not a surprise that it actually requires a little bit more than a microdose to really get any kind of substantial improvement. Okay, so we have a couple more major psychedelics to discuss before we can move on to. I'll answer questions if you guys have any. Uh, I guess you're still there. I don't know. Somebody asked me the other day, what is the worst thing about living in the Amazon? And it's definitely the internet. Uh, okay, so mescaline, I want to talk about a little bit because it is completely different from the rest of the major, well-known psychedelic compounds. It is in a totally different class than LSD and psilocybin. It is a phenethylamine, and it is more closely related to ephedrine and MDMA than it is to LSD. Although the effect is probably more or less, or more similar to LSD than it is to ephedrine. I think that the reason that you don't see a lot of research being done on mescaline these days, even though in the early days that was the psychedelic that got the most attention back in the 30s and 40s. It's the one that Huxley wrote, The Doors of Perception, about his experiences with mescaline. The very early psychonaut occultists like Aleister Crowley, that was the psychedelic that they would have been experimenting with back then as well. The problem with it is that it lasts for way too long. I do San Pedro ceremonies from time to time, and one of the last ceremonies, the medicine lasted for both of us for 37 hours or something like that, 40 something hours. So I think that it doesn't get a lot of attention in the clinical research settings because it just lasts for so long. Also, it's a lot more toxic than the other psychedelics, which isn't to say that it's really very toxic, because it's not. But it is a little bit more rough on you than the rest of them. And again, it is extremely difficult to measure doses. Mescaline comes in several forms. There's freebase and two other, and the potency is a little different for each one. But if you are a person that is planning to microdose with mescaline, you're probably using either San Pedro cactus or paste. I would definitely recommend paste, and it's very easy to make. All you do is you can watch, I have a video that I've made about how to prepare the San Pedro tea. So after you have prepared the tea, you just concentrate it until there's like practically no water left. It becomes a really hard paste. You have to get it out of the pan before it cools, because if you don't, it's going to be rock hard and it sticks to everything and you'll never get it out of there. But it's actually really easy to microdose with. And the little bit of research that has been done in this decade did establish that mescaline causes, like all the other psychedelics, including ketamine, by the way, which is actually dissociative, but it also enhances this neuroplasticity. But mescaline increases the BDFN in the brain, as well as glutamate, which facilitates learning and other cognitive processes. It enhances all of those. And I think that one of the ways to understand, the best way to understand what moderate, low, or micro doses of any one of these compounds, how it is going to affect you, is to take the macro doses and understand subjectively what the differences are, so that when you scale it down, you kind of understand what it is that they're doing. And so to compare this to ayahuasca, it might help me to put this in perspective, or to help me put it in perspective for you in case you haven't experienced it yourself. But San Pedro, for example, is taken during the day, and it is an experience oftentimes of being like bombarded by information. The visuals tend to be very, very tiny and like lots of them. For example, a very common vision is this sea of photons, is how I refer to it. And I've encountered numerous people that have had this same experience, and they're like individual units of consciousness that are also basically photons, and they're like tesseracts. You can zoom them in, and you can sort of see their details. But since one of the dimensions is in time, you can never perceive the whole thing at once. So it's always kind of morphing and changing. And there are just trillions and trillions. It's like they're infinite. They go on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And one of the guys that a few months after I had this experience for myself, I came upon this guy that had drank way too much, and he was just sitting there with his head in his hands going, the trillions and billions and trillions and billions. I knew exactly what he was looking at, you know? So what I'm getting at here with this, and it also helps to understand the chemistry, right? Or the classes of chemicals that these things belong to. And mescaline is closely related to MDMA, actually. So I think that it is a good choice, probably even better than psilocybin for treating depression and also for enhancing learning. And again, I can only go on my own subjective experience with these compounds because the research is not there for mescaline. But in my experience at least, it's like shining an interior sun, and as I said, you know, chemically, it definitely, the research that we do have tells us that it basically creates fertile ground for enhanced learning and creative capacity. So I would say that if you are someone that is working in a very technical industry, or you are trying to learn something that requires a tremendous amount of subtlety, or another great example I can give of how you can use mescaline. I mean, this was a higher dose experience, but again, I think if you have these higher dose experiences and then you kind of scale down the effect, that's, you know, what you're going to get from the lower doses or microdoses. And so once I took a moderate dose of San Pedro before I went to perform, well, actually, I pretty much always do that, but I think this is one of the early, and this is why, because this is what happened. I sing and play guitar, and so I was playing, and I noticed that I could focus as if it was my entire the entirety of my awareness on my picking hand, but I could also think totally independently, but with equal focus on what my fret hand was doing. And I had total awareness of how my diaphragm was functioning inside of my, ribs, and I could feel my vibrato, and I could sculpt it, and my perception of time was different. So I could approach the beat from, you know, a little bit behind, a little bit ahead, from underneath of it. But the point of this is that it gave me, like, I don't know, 8 different windows of observation, and I could focus equally on each of those windows as if it was my sole focus. So again, this is just my personal anecdotal experience, but I think that, you know, if you are multitasking, or I think for depression, also if you suffer from chronic fatigue syndrome, or any one of these, or narcolepsy, it is a very strong stimulant, but it doesn't have that sort of nerve grating dispersion that a lot of amphetamine type compounds will give you. And so I think that mescaline it's unfortunate that it's so understudied, and also one of the other advantages of it is that it is once you have it down. Again, this is just like it's even worse than the mushrooms. Uh, uh, Peyote buttons, for example, can have tenfold variation in potency. San Pedro is not a lot better. If you are working with a strain that has been stabilized um, and bred, then you're going to have a better chance. But if you're working with wild cactus or you're working with different cactuses, the potency varies tremendously. So the best thing to do is to try to just source a bunch from one cactus, very large cactuses. So uh, you know, if you're taking small doses, a couple of arms should last you a while, and cook it down into the paste. And even when it's concentrated into the black paste that you get, it's not really that strong. You have to eat maybe 10 grams of it in order to have a really strong experience. So I think 3 to 4 grams rolled into a ball every 3 to 4 days will work miracles for depression and enhancing cognition. The thing is, you have to remember to take it in the morning, because even at low doses, this is a very powerful stimulant, and it could very likely disturb your sleep schedule. And if you take just a little bit too much, a little bit too late, you can miss an entire night of sleep. So if you are going to attempt to microdose with San Pedro extract or mescaline, I would assume that most of you probably don't have access to pure mescaline. Um, uh, I think that it's the most underrated and clearly the most underused. Um, yeah, so we should talk about DMT because I've actually experimented with. Again, I don't know if any of this really qualifies as microdosing. The way that I'm advising to to use these things at the absolute minimum, it seems to me that an efficacious dose is going to at least have about the same effect as like really strong coffee. Um, any less than that, I don't think you're going to notice much of an improvement. But DMT, I have experimented with just taking like a small puff early in the morning or maybe in the afternoon, various times in the day. And again, this is just a subjective experience, but it sort of has the equivalent of like 3 or 4 hours of meditation. The much greater clarity, dispersion of anxiety. It's definitely helpful. I personally don't like the physical feeling that is associated with DMT. Um, but I would say that if you have it, it's definitely worthy. Even if you're not feeling inclined to take a whole blast off kind of experience with it, there's definitely benefits to just taking a puff of DMT every once in a while. And again, every single one of these compounds has been shown to enhance neurogenesis and neuroplasticity and create more brain-derived. Threshold dosing really is what I mean. Microdosing is pretty much that's not what this is about. It's not what I'm talking about really. I guess threshold dosing. The thing is, if I made that title, then nobody would have known what the fuck I was talking about. So, yeah, I mean, little puffs of DMT, man. If you're suffering from mild depression or just you're just feeling a bit befuddled. In my experience, it's if you don't have time to sit and meditate for an hour, it's a reasonable substitute for that. Sorry, I have to continuously reconnect my computer to the internet. Okay, so oh my God, it's not last, definitely not least. but we're not at the end yet. Let's see. Ketamine. Um, a lot of people have given me shit for even suggesting that ketamine is anything but pure evil, the psychedelic equivalent of crack cocaine or something. I actually had someone say that in a group the other day, and that's just not true. The truth is that people are capable of abusing anything from sex to food. I mean, if there was a way to abuse oxygen, I'm sure people would figure it out. And I am not a person that believes that just because something has its origin in the laboratory, that it is not good. Ketamine has a host of clinical applications. It, just like all of the, I would say, other psychedelics, except that ketamine is not like a classical psychedelic, it's a dissociative. Um, yeah, if you use ketamine, for example, people that suffer from chronic pain associated with Lyme disease, and also Lyme disease causes a lot of, what would you call it, like a cluster of problems. Um, Anxiety. I mean, I dated someone that had Lyme disease, and it was just a horrific thing to watch the progression of the damage. And at one point, she was actually prescribed ketamine in a nasal spray, and that's why I have experience with microdosing it. Because in my own case, even though I just suffer from autoimmune problems, one of the symptoms, I guess, is malabsorption syndrome. So I don't get all the nutrients that I need from my food. My muscles are very often very weak and painful, and I have um, not lupus, but what is the fibromyalgia type muscle burning. And so that's why I eventually, what about PCP? That one I'm gonna have to just leave alone. Actually, my father was a PCP addict when I was a child, and I would have to say that PCP is more like methamphetamine or something. I don't think that it really is a beneficial compound. Um, Again, these were all a bunch of biker idiots that were abusing it, but I definitely don't promote PCP. Uh, Although it was kind of interesting. I don't know. I smoked it a couple times when I was a teenager, and I mean, anyways. So ketamine. One of the most interesting things about ketamine, I think, is that it has this capacity to reset the central nervous system and certain, uh, I guess, neural pathways that have developed. That are somehow associated with a chronic pain state. And I think more research is necessary to figure out exactly what's going on there. But my suspicion is that we have a sort of localized dump of brain-derived neurotropic factor, something along those lines. It facilitates a rapid and lasting reorganization of some kind of neurological associations that that allow or that facilitate the resolution of chronic pain. And it doesn't make a lot of sense from a clinical perspective, but it is true. In California, you can get. I mean, I don't know. There may be other states where it's legal as well, but California, people go for ketamine comas, and oftentimes when they are revived from the ketamine coma, their chronic pain state is in abeyance for up to 6 months, sometimes permanently. Also, PTSD. There are tremendously successful stories of treating PTSD with a single dose of ketamine. In one case that I have personal experience of, a girl had extremely severe PTSD, and she took a very, very, very high dose, and she said that it was like she was suddenly in this like empty space kind of, and there was nothing but her, and all these puzzle pieces that were scattered all over the space. And she just knew instinctively that she needed to pick the puzzle pieces up and put them together. And when she had put the final puzzle piece into place, she woke up from the ketamine K-hole. I don't know if that's really an appropriate way to speak of it, but woke up from this K-hole, and she has not experienced PTSD ever again. And that was like 5 years ago. And again, this is an extremely severe case of post-traumatic stress disorder cured by a single dose of ketamine. So I think that people really need to be careful with their prejudices, because discouraging people from seeking treatment that could be more efficacious than any of their alternatives is not helpful. And the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I see this all the time. People that have no direct knowledge of a thing speaking about this thing. And that is, I don't know, like, who doesn't get taught that that's not something that you should do? If you don't know from firsthand experience, then you really just should not speak. But then, I guess as in general, those that speak do not know, and those that know do not speak. Maybe that's what the issue is. So before we get to ayahuasca, which is going to be the last compound that we discuss in this live stream, we're going to need to talk about MDMA. While we're on the subject of synthetic compounds, this is another one that I see all the time. People just have this reaction like, oh no, that's just this toxic chemical party drug, and that's absolutely not true. And the thing about all of this is, the reason why it matters is that all of these compounds, although there is overlap in the mechanisms that facilitate their action, and the type of effect that they have, they still are better at certain applications than the other ones, right? So LSD may be the best for enhancing neuroplasticity, and for example, returning a 55-year-old state to the neuroplasticity of a 5-year-old, which is what one of the researchers at Princeton said that they observed. Psilocybin may be the best at treating depression, and MDMA is hands down the best at treating PTSD. And the reasons for this, again, are not really known. The interesting thing is that, from looking at the research papers, all the technical papers that I've been reading, they're seeing basically the same, from a neurophysiological point of view, the same stuff is happening with all of these things, but just to varying degrees. And I honestly don't really think that the answers can be found necessarily purely on the chemical and biological levels. Wow, there's an assassin bug right there. You do not want to get bit by one of those, man. You can go ahead and yikes. Man, there's a tarantula right over there on the wall. I might, when we're done, right before I go, I'll take it over and see if I can shine a light and show you guys. It was on our bedroom ceiling the other night. I had to, this was like chasing a poodle out of, it's seriously like that big. Pretty harmless, but it's just crazy. Like, I've never had anything like that inside my house before, like just randomly all of a sudden there's actually a tarantula loose in the bedroom. Okay, so we're talking about MDMA, and the reason we're talking about MDMA, let me look at the exact stats on this. There's a very large study completed in the last year or two with MDMA, and 45% of these military personnel that had had their legs blown off, seen their friends blown to pieces, like really, really horribly traumatic. Like, nothing can help these people under any circumstances that were known prior to this research. 45% in 1 month of bi-weekly, so we're talking like two to four, yeah, okay, so it was weekly or bi-weekly, 2 to 4 doses of MDMA cured PTSD permanently in 45% of these people. So, if you're one of those people that's out there discouraging people from taking MDMA for therapeutic, just stop it. It helps people. And then 76% of them were cured permanently with 1 year of treatment. And again, you guys, it's really important to remember that there are no substitute for these substances. There's nothing else known. For example, the smoking cessation with the psilocybin that I mentioned earlier. I actually did it with LSD. I made a video, like my second video or something, a few years ago about this experience that I had. And interestingly, this research hadn't been done yet. It didn't exist. I just intuited that this would work. By the way, speaking of intuiting things, Dr. Timothy Leary has a mixed reputation, and he's being forgotten, I think, sort of eclipsed by people like Terence McKenna, which I think is extremely unfortunate. And I just watched an old interview with him, and he was talking about all of this stuff before any of the research had been done. And I think that also sort of speaks volumes about how powerful these substances are, because you could observe in the people around you that are taking them these effects, which, by the way, is part of a lot of these studies that have been done. The researchers don't just what do you call it? Like follow up with the subject of the research, but with their friends, family, and coworkers, and get input from them. And it's universally corroborated. There's a link actually to the Ross cat from Johns Hopkins. By McKenna? What? Oh, no. He wasn't a researcher, really. Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary is basically the reason why we're all here. I'm going to make a video about him because it really upset. I mean, he was a huge influence on me as a kid. And, I was growing up in a very conservative, Christian, redneck, racist, idiot, kind of just surrounded by them. And on the other hand, the other part of the population somehow that was like children of the elite, because it was like right around Washington, D.C., where a lot of the wealthy people lived. And so I was extremely alienated. And for me, my first inclination as a kid that there were other people out there that weren't just brain-dead idiots, and that there were people that were, thinking more like I was Timothy Leary. I mean, a guy pretty much saved my life, And I think a lot of people have forgotten that if it wasn't for the risks that Leary took, I mean, he went to prison. None of us would know any of this stuff. I mean, he's the one that brought it out into the light of day, and his work is still, I mean, in some ways, in my opinion, it's more useful than McKenna's, because Terence McKenna, it's great to hear his linguistic pyrotechnics and dazzling ideas about attractors and hyperspace and all of this stuff. But Timothy Leary was a psychologist from Harvard, and the things that he's offering are actionable and things that are much more easier to make investitures out of and do something with. So I got lost on the Leary thing, but you guys should watch out for that video because it's going to be a really good one. I think we were talking about addiction. It's another thing that LSD and psilocybin in particular. It goes back to that thing about not discouraging people or speaking about stuff that you have no direct experience of. I used to go to what do you call them? The meetings where you're anonymous and everybody's on drugs or whatever. Not in Narcotics Anonymous, and try to tell them that ayahuasca would help them more than I mean, these guys, if you listen to them at these meetings, they'll say, if you work it, it works over and over and over again, and then they go around and they tell their stories, and they're like, this is my 15th time through the program. It really works. I just got out of prison for the 7th time, and I'm just sitting there going like, do you hear yourself? clearly this is just terrible and doesn't work. It does not work. This is not good. It's not helping you. You need to go to South America and drink ayahuasca, and they would like, oh no, blah 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 blah, you're a fucking dumbass, get out of here. So it's tragic that people are discouraged from using the one thing that could help them more than anything else, and particularly among drug addicts, because of the stigma and the association that anything that alters your consciousness is somehow bad or will lead to, and that's another thing, nicotine and caffeine are addictive and they alter your consciousness to some extent. And so they're telling you if you do any addictive behavior, it's going to trigger, you're going to relapse. That's what they preach. And they're all just sucking down caffeine and cigarettes, like chain smoking and cup after cup of coffee with tons of sugar in it, which is also altering their consciousness. I mean, it's just really sad because what I was going to say about the smoking cessation, for example, is that one day I just decided that I was going to take a couple of hits of acid. I hadn't slept the night before because we tripped the night before. So I ate some acid and I went out on the deck and I just sat and did pranayama, which is a meditation where you're breathing very deeply, inundating the brain with oxygen, which is one of the fuels that it needs to do its work. And then you are depriving, and there is a rhythm. The rhythm can be different. I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but basically the idea is that the inundation of oxygen and then the deprivation of oxygen alternated back and forth is a sort of a fast track to altered states of consciousness. Also, when you are inhaling and then holding the oxygen and you're focusing the mind on this thing that you were trying to program, the higher levels of oxygen facilitate the brain doing its work much more rapidly. And so when you have a compound like LSD that has enhanced your plasticity so that you can, say, reprogram an addiction like smoking, because everything's just flopping around, wiggling where it was rigid before, now you can just direct it because that's how our brain works. And so this combination of this breathing technique and the LSD, I forgot that I even smoked the next day. Like, it was that powerful that I was I remembered that I was a smoker again because I was walking along and I stuck my hand in my pocket and I felt a pouch of tobacco. I didn't even know what it was for a second. And I'm a person that would wake up and smoke first thing in the morning. I started when I was like 7 years old or 9. I was like 31 when this happened. And I didn't entirely quit at that point, but I only smoked occasionally after that, like if I got stressed out or drunk or something. So it's just, and you guys, it's really important to bear in mind that that's pretty much impossible. You know what I mean? Even the suggestion that a single dose of some medication could reverse a lifelong addiction. Nicotine is up there with heroin or methamphetamine in terms of the power of the addiction. In a single dose like that is just, it's too much for most people to accept. But again, if you understand the neurochemistry, the neurobiology, the neurophysiology behind it, it's actually really, really easy to understand why this stuff happens. It's not woo. It's not. It's not like marketing. That's one of the things I like about the fact that this is illegal stuff here. Except for the ayahuasca, in a lot of places, the fact that these compounds can't really be marketed and sold to people is kind of helps keep the the information relatively reliable. Okay, so let's talk about ayahuasca. Man, my throat is just parched. How long have I been talking? An hour. There are two ways to do this with ayahuasca: vine only, and then with DMT. So a lot of people do the vine only microdosing, which actually, if you think about it, doesn't really make a lot of sense. Um, if you're microdosing, there's not going to be a DMT effect anyways. So, I'm not really sure I understand why it is that people feel that it could be better to only take the vine. Um, but I disagree that that's a. Oh, actually, you know what? Legality. Speaking of legality, legality could be the main reason why there are so many vine-only um, microdosing supplements available. In most places, the vine extract is not going to be uh, is not going to be legal. Um, so again, one of the best ways I think to understand how these things are going to affect you in micro is to take them in macro. And so uh, ayahuasca. And I'm just going to go ahead and commit woo-aside here and just go all, third eye on you and whatnot. Um, um, because that's what ayahuasca does, it really does. I mean, sometimes when you drink ayahuasca, you can literally see through the pineal gland, which actually does have rods and cones and is connected to the visual cortex. Um, uh, that's a crazy story, actually. I'll go ahead and tell you that one real quick. One night I had drank the medicine in the jungle, and I was laying on a deck, and I had my eyes closed. I was trying to go to sleep, and I watched this mosquito land right in the middle of my forehead, and then I felt it bite me, and then I realized, uh, yeah, Tim Leary, yeah. I realized that I had actually just watched this mosquito through my forehead, and then I realized I was looking through my forehead, and it was kind of orange. It's not like I could see clearly, but I'm assuming that was like from looking through the blood and bone that it was kind of like tinted. Uh, so I sat up and looked down the railing, and I could see everything exactly where it was supposed to be. Waved my hands in front of my face, and I'm thinking the brain could generate all of this, probably reconstructed accurately based on my memories of having seen it, you know. Um, so I couldn't really come to a conclusion. And remember, of course, that the third eye is associated with the sixth sense and all this. So, and also the harmalas in the vine were referred to up until the late 60s as uh, uh, telepamine or telepathine or both, maybe, because there's two of them: tetrahydroharmaline, harmaline, and oh, there's one more. Um, so, uh, yeah, Tim Leary, man, you spelled it wrong, but incorrectly. So, anyways, remember the sixth sense association with the pineal gland, right? So, the next morning, I walk down the stairs, I see the shaman, and he just looks at me and he says, "Sometimes you can see through your forehead when you take the medicine." And what the hell was that? You know, just of all the things that he could have said to me. So it's like and this isn't the only time this has happened to me. Numerous times I have received some kind of perspective or information when I've taken Wilca or Yopo or ayahuasca, and this sort of like telepathic connection persists for days or weeks. I saw somebody earlier had mentioned that after ketamine, that synchronicities and whatnot increase. That's something that is reported extremely commonly by people that take ayahuasca and DMT, and I think that there are a couple of reasons for that. I think that because you are literally growing new neural pathways when you take any of these compounds, including ketamine, and enhancing neuroplasticity. Of course, there's the reducing valve in our consciousness theory that psychedelics kind of turn down a reducing valve or even turn it off in the case of high doses of DMT, leaving us more receptive to a wider range of incoming information, and broadening the parameters of our sense perceptions. And you're actually having, they did brain scans on people on LSD and psilocybin a few years ago, and there was electrical activity that was observed in parts of the brain that are never used otherwise. They've never seen electrical activity in those parts of the brains under any other circumstances. So, and also the inter-region, the communication between normally non-communicative parts of the brain, regions of the brain. Yes, Robert Anton Wilson is definitely my other biggest hero, I would have to say. But the default mode of the brain, and anyways, there's greater interconnectivity between regions of the brain that don't normally have any communication, and so the expanded or enhanced or increased perception of synchronicities and that type of it's not supernatural. It's just stuff that we normally don't perceive, I guess. I mean, I don't know how to talk about it. Preternatural, is that a better word than supernatural? And so, ayahuasca, I think, even if you're just microdosing it, there are two advantages, I think, that, and I would imagine Syrian Rue probably has the same sort of effect, although it's probably much more difficult to microdose Syrian Rue because it's, 3 seeds is enough for Harmala dose. I think it's only like 3 seeds or something. So ayahuasca gives us greater connection to our body, to the feminine, to intuition, greater emotional intelligence. And also, I think it's quite likely that it's the presence of dimethyltryptamine that does activate the pineal gland, that results in a greater access to cognitive or capacities of cognitive capacities that we don't normally have consistent access to, like telepathy and precognition and that sort of thing. So I think we just went through all of the major psychedelics and the fundamental differences and the advantages that different psychedelics have in different domains. So if you guys have any questions, I can answer them for a few minutes. It's been an hour and maybe 15 minutes. Well, that's because you needed 500 seeds. He's talking about Louis using morning glory seeds to because they have LSA, and that's actually an interesting thing. LSD and LSA. It's the first time that a chemical was discovered by man in the laboratory or synthesized in the laboratory before it was discovered in nature. Usually, analogs are discovered because, for example, an ethnobotanist has been sent to South America to research indigenous medicine, and they find a plant and they bring it back to the laboratory, and the pharmaceutical company wants to make a patentable chemical from it, and so you get an analog. Thanks, Fernando. And in the case of LSD and LSA, lysergic acid diethylamide 25 tartrate was synthesized by Dr. Albert Hofmann, I think in 1938, but not discovered to be psychoactive until 1943 on accident. But the LSA, lysergic acid amide, which is almost exactly the same compound, was discovered in nature a few years later. Um, so I see a few of you guys just hopped on just as we were wrapping up. um, but we did, right? We talked about LSD, we talked about psilocybin, we talked about DMT, we talked about ayahuasca, mescaline. All of these compounds, the bullet point of the presentation basically is that every single one of these compounds will enhance cognition. They will all help you to battle depression. They can help you to overcome addiction. They can enhance your memory if you're getting older or you have damaged your brain with pharmaceutical drugs like I did. They can help you to regenerate those damaged neural pathways, and they all are more efficacious at some applications than others. So it's a good idea to have a working knowledge of the differences between each one of these compounds. So do me a favor and hit the like button, share, subscribe. You can support us on Patreon and get access to secret streams, where we go further down the rabbit hole than I do with the general public, and we talk about all sorts of racy stuff. Once again, I'm still here, so if you guys have any more questions, go ahead and hit me with them. Otherwise, keep an eye out for the Timothy Leary video that's coming in the next couple of days. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. Again, we've been demonetized, so we definitely appreciate it. If you want to make a contribution one time, there's a Zelle, PayPal, and Skrill email address in the description. Louis P. as a newbie to Thelema and occultism. I don't talk about that stuff a lot on this channel anymore, and I should, and it's funny that we just happen to get into the subject, and I see this 1111 on the what was I about to, okay, so Leary, and we were talking about Leary. He actually said at one point that he felt like he was continuing Aleister Crowley's, yeah, you can ask about the stone from the Pleiades, sure. But what I was saying is that Leary actually said that he felt like he was continuing Aleister Crowley's work on this planet, which was to encourage people to discover their true purpose, to know thyself, basically. Tim Leary said that Socrates was one of his great heroes, and that was the reason that part of the reason for our global disharmony, one of the main constituent causes, is that we have a crisis of purpose. People feel like the universe is just a bunch of random probabilistic gobbledygook. There, without any seed of purpose in it. There is no reason to be ethical. There's no meaning in anything. And so you have school shootings, and you have terrible pop music and shitty movies, and the whole vapid, banal, mainstream, fucking vomit bucket culture. And Crowley was basically an early version of Timothy Leary, attempting to encourage people just to engage in certain practices and to take certain compounds that would result in the expansion of consciousness, that would lead to a greater knowledge of self, and encouraging people to commit to living for the things that they love, and so yeah, it was just interesting that Leary led to Crowley, because that is basically what happened in the physical world as well. So Fernando, what did you want to ask about the stone from the Pleiades? I guess, even though this has nothing to do with the subject we were talking about, I'll give you guys a little bit of backstory on that. Like 2006 or something, 2010, it was a while ago now, I started to experience a sequence of synchronicities and other phenomena that like telepathy with people that was, it wasn't like, I like one sentence or um, uh, uh, we're talking like, one of my girlfriends knew every thought that had gone through my head, what I was doing, where I was at, like for 45 minutes or something. I mean, it was undeniable, I guess, is the bullet point of this presentation. And there was a lot of stuff that was happening that it was very difficult to explain. How did I come across them? Okay, so that's what that's what we're going for here. Uh, uh, so one day during this period, my roommate came and got me, and he said, "Hey man, I got this weird email invite from this guy Golden Light Eagle, who is a Sioux Sundance chief, and they're having some kind of gathering in New Mexico, in Farmington, New Mexico, Aztec, New Mexico, I mean, no Farmington, I guess, and so we should go, and so we did, and before we even got there, it got like rabbit hole fucking weird. But upon my arrival, I got out of the car and this guy's walking by and he looks at me and it's like our eyes kind of locked together and it was like this exchange that almost felt like electricity or something. That doesn't really do it justice. But then he walks over and grabs me by the arm and he says, "Man, I haven't seen you in 40,000 years. We got to get to the ceremony." And I was like, "What the hell?" I had just gotten out of the car. I had no idea what this event really even was about. And so, um, and so, and so we go around to the back of the building, and there's a circle. I'm the 13th person, or yeah, including the Hawaiian shaman. His name is Reynolds Kamakaviole or something. A really, really, really difficult to pronounce Hawaiian sort of shaman in this red suit, and so the circle closes and he says, "May the wind blow to confirm the power of our prayers." And the wind blew so hard that like the gravel on the pavement like blew away. And so that got my attention. And so their message was that the star tribes were interdimensional beings that had been in contact with certain tribal people. Most of them, I guess, really the tribe of Judea, a lot of the Native Americans and South American and Babylonian and Syrian, all of these people had been in contact with these star tribes from the Pleiades and what is the other one that they're always from? Sirius. Uh, and so at that stage in my life, and even now, my initial impulse would be to blow them off, regardless of feather headdresses and whatnot. But what occurred to me is like, can you really be full of shit and command the wind? Like that got my attention, and so and so you know I've made videos about this a little bit, and I plan on telling the whole story in like a long form video at some point. But the rock, the Pleiadian Stone, um, I wasn't anticipating talking about this, uh, uh, was given to me, and a couple of my friends received some as well. And coincidentally, we all worked with glass at the time, and so we knew that you couldn't fasten crystal or glass to stone in the way that you would have to in order to fake these things. And there's a picture of one of them in the thumbnail, well, and in the video, you guys, it's called like Danny Carey and the Pleiadian Space Rock or something. And Danny Carey from Tool did actually end up with this thing in his hand 2 weeks later. I mean, the story is my phone battery is about to die, but I'll just keep talking until it does, I guess. So okay, so they give us the rock, and I'm like, first of all, you don't like if you really had a rock from another star system, you're not gonna just give it to people, that just you would go to like NASA or something, and so it occurred to me, why don't you just do that? So I was like, okay, well that makes sense, and so first I went to the college, Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado, with this thing like the next week or something, and I walked in to the college. It was supposed to be closed, and I walked in on these two professors that had a map on the desk, and they were talking about this military grid that I had been told about by this psychic at the crystal shop in Durango, which it just seemed too incredible, that. And I didn't take her seriously, of course. I didn't take psychics seriously. I was not expecting all this shit to turn out to be real. And so I walk in, these guys have got this map, and one of them is saying, like, oh, yeah, the military is setting up their grid here in Silverton, and then they turned around and looked at me like, what are you doing in here? Because the doors were only open because the band was loading their gear in, and so I wasn't supposed to be able to get in. And so I showed them the rock, and they're like, no, I've never seen anything like that. I have no idea. I wouldn't even venture to guess. But we're busy right now, so go to the head of the department and show him. His name is this, and he's in this floor in this room. And so I go down to him, and he says, in my 40 years of studying gems and minerals, I've never seen anything like this. But so here's an address for a laboratory in Bodo Park, and so I go down to the laboratory, and I give the guy in the lab coat the rock, and he looks at it and he says, well, I would think that one of two things is true. One of them is that I'm going to put this drop of this chemical on it, and it's glass, and it's going to melt the glass because this chemical melts glass. So otherwise, the story that you've been told is true. Because the thing is, you guys can check it out. It's in the video. This doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, I know I wouldn't be standing here otherwise. And so he puts the drop of chemical on the rock, and it doesn't melt it. And the scientist looked at me like I slapped him, the lab technician or whatever. And so we walk out into the parking lot, and he's like, tell me the story again. So I repeated everything, and he's looking up in the sky with this glazed look on his face. And I'm just going man, this is just too much. And bear in mind, you guys, that weird stuff like this had been going on for quite a while at this point. So I, what now, So I drive out of Bodo Park, and I see a sign for Homeland Security, and I think, okay, well, let's go see what they think of this. And so I go over to the Homeland Security building and ring the doorbell, and this guy comes out, and he's like, can I help you? And I'm like, well, I hope so. And I told him the story, and I was like, I just came from this chemical analysis place over here, and he put this drop on it, nothing happened. And I'm starting to think that maybe these people are telling the truth. And so he says, well, it would be ridiculous of me to tell you that there are no aliens on this planet, but you're at the wrong department. We deal with illegal aliens and terrorists, not space aliens. So anyways, I'm not going to continue with the story. I already made the video. If you guys want to hear the rest of it, you can watch the video, I guess. Like I said, ultimately it ended up in the hands of Danny Carey, and it is now in the possession of a Navajo medicine man by the name of Nighthorse in northern New Mexico. And one of the things that I hope to do eventually is to go and find Nighthorse and convince him, because I'm not going to ask him to give me the rock back, but I'm going to try to convince him that we need to get some more tests done. And there is also a second specimen that is in the possession of the former singer from one of my bands. He was my best friend for a long time. He has one, and there's a third one that another friend of mine has. So the story isn't over either. I mean, it may seem incredible that we just kind of dropped it, but things reached a fever pitch of insanity, and we're just very different people. I don't think any of us really cared that much about, whether we could prove anything to anyone, and that's just not where we were coming from when all this was happening. So eventually we just kind of forgot about it. And then when I started this channel, somebody asked me something about some aspect of the story, and I thought, man, I wonder if my friend still has a specimen. And sure enough, he did, and that's the one in the picture in the thumbnail. So that's the short version, man. But there is so much more to that story. Okay, so I have to go. Good night. Thank you guys so much for spending this time with me, and we will see you again very, very soon.